Hello, it's John Heaton, and I'm going to continue my review of individual Beatles tracks, but on this occasion I'm going to combine two together, and maybe I'm going to continue doing that because I think doing a video on each track could get a bit much, but decided, particularly where I see something either in common or interesting companion piece to each other, I'm going to combine two songs in the one video. So today I'm going to do two George Harrison songs, one from the White Album, Long, 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 and one from Abbey Road, Here Comes the Sun. So it's interesting, Here Comes the Sun, probably his most well-known track ever, bar none. Even probably more well-known than My Sweet Lord, probably more well-known than something. If you look on Spotify, I think Here Comes the Sun is the most popular Beatles track, and Come Together is also up there. So it's interesting, even more than Yesterday, I think, in terms of downloads. Doesn't make it a better song, I'm just pointing out what the young kids are listening to mostly from Beatles, or the most popular tracks. Whereas Long, 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 I wouldn't say it's forgotten or anything, but it's an aficionado's, where's Revolution in the Head? I thought I had that to read out some stuff, but I can't remember what he said, I think. Ian MacDonald's very complimentary about Long, Long, Long. He says, after the ponderous While My Guitar, the nasty piggies and the space filler Savoy Truffle, at last the real George. And he's very complimentary about this track, although he does point out that it uses the same triple time changes as Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands from Dylan, and actually melodically is pretty similar as well, if you think about it. And I remembered that Give Me Love, George's famous hit from '73, had a similar melody to I Want You from Dylan, so that's interesting. But anyway, I don't think he didn't nick the whole melody. It's not like a plagiarism, but it's he definitely got inspiration from Dylan in both those cases. It's a wonderfully atmospheric track. It appears right at the end of side 3, which, as you probably know, is a fairly mysterious, and sides 3 and 4 quite a dark, not much upbeat material, not much happy-go-lucky material on those two sides, and you get to the end of side 3 and you've got this beautiful melody. I think Paul McCartney pointed out that The Inner Light, the B-side of Lady Madonna, he said, forget the Indian music, isn't it just a great melody? But I think this one's got a better melody, and I think it's a more haunting tune, although it is influenced by Dylan, as we said. It's a more haunting song all round, for sure. Great piano from Chris Thomas, and McCartney is on organ, and we all know the story how his last organ note vibrated a bottle of Blue Nun or something on the top of the organ, and it rattled and made that weird noise, and George started wailing and Ringo started banging the drum roll, and it was made for a very atmospheric end. So I think it's a forgotten gem. And it's a pity if it'd been written a few months later, we would have seen them perform it live in the Let It Be film. But maybe it was a bit too slow for that, and it's best left to the imagination. Top Drawer George, whether it's well known or not, and it's also a song. I think it's about his love of God, although one can never be sure. Could be love of Patty as well. But very uplifting lyrics and mostly optimistic. And then we come to the other song discussion in this video, Here Comes the Sun, and this is supremely optimistic, but in a good way. It's thoroughly uplifting. One can understand why it's one of the most popular Beatles songs. I think it got voted as number 4 in some poll. It'll certainly be in my top 10. What can we say about this track which hasn't already been said? Well, I'll try and add something new if I can. George sagged off school, for want of a better phrase, when he didn't fancy an Apple board meeting, so he went to Eric Clapton's garden, and who lived in a house called Hurtwood Edge in Ewhurst, Surrey. And he was just strumming his guitar. I think it was in April of '69, according to Clapton. And he just wrote the song there, and apparently it was one of the hottest Aprils on record, after one of the coldest Marches on record. So this might explain it's been a long, cold, lonely winter, although that could also be a reference to the Let It Be sessions, which George has found so miserable. What else is noticeable about this track? Lennon doesn't play on it. He was recovering from his car crash. He got back to Abbey Road just as they were in the middle of Maxwell, didn't contribute much, if anything, to that, and made his first Abbey Road contribution proper on Come Together, his own track, if one excludes I Want You, She's So Heavy, which was recorded the backing track back in February. And he also played on You Never Give Me Your Money in May. But he was away for Here Comes the Sun. So the harmonies that you hear on that song are all Paul and George, and it's just brilliant harmony. And there's so much good to say about this track. The Ringo's drumming, probably in his top 5 Beatle drums tracks of all of them. You know, when people talk about Day in the Life, people talk about Rain, but the drumming on this track and on Something in particular, in fact all the way through Abbey Road, I think I'm right in saying he got a new drum kit or a new set of tom-toms or something was different. I think I read in an interview. But his drumming sounds so crisp, even on the original version, so we'll see what the remaster has in store. But maybe the drums will be even more to the fore. It's a strange, unusual time signature on this song, kind of changes between, I was reading, 11/8 to 4/4 to 7/8. And Ringo in the Living Material Scorsese documentary recalls being told how the song goes in terms of time signature and all these technical terms, and Ringo said okay, and he just winged it. And it's not an easy track to play superb drums on, but he pulls it off masterfully. And the drum rolls in the sun, 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 here it comes, in between those, just brilliant. And then another wonderful addition to this track is the hand claps, which I think were from Ringo, Paul and George, just before the last verse. Little darling, I see the ice is slowly melting. Just before the last verse, you've got the that bit, the hand claps, and simple but thoroughly effective. And then George, by the way, the Moog synthesizer I said on Maxwell was played by George. It was actually played by Paul, I've read, but George owned the Moog, so that's probably why I thought he played it. But on his own song, Here Comes the Sun, he was the one who overdubbed the Moog on the 19th of August 69, so the penultimate Beatles recording session. And the Moog adds a great touch to the song. I think Ian MacDonald describes it as slightly wobbly, but I disagree. I think it's wonderful. And I've got to mention George Martin's orchestration, which admittedly are a bit low in the mix on the original album. Hopefully Giles Martin would have increased them and brought them to the fore. There's at least 10 or 12 string players playing a very tasteful string section. So I think it's all in all, it's a superlative performance by Paul, George and Ringo without John, but one doesn't have to go on about that. There were plenty of other songs from the Beatles not featuring all 4, which didn't detract. I will say that any time he's tried to do this live, it hasn't been tremendously successful. Certainly hasn't been a patch on the studio version, which says something of the superb nature of the original recording. On Bangladesh, he just did a solo version with Pete Ham, which was okay. He didn't feature it on the 74 tour at all. He played it with Paul Simon as an acoustic duet in 76 on Saturday Night Live. He played a pretty abysmal version in the Princess Trust concert in 1987. He played a kind of lifeless rendition on the 1991 tour of Japan, and that's it. Not once did he nail this song live. Maybe it's because the studio version is where we're supposed to hear it. So I think I've talked about everything. There wasn't a guitar solo featured in at some stage, but it was abandoned, probably correctly. I can't really imagine a guitar solo on this track. Here Comes the Moon was a follow-up in 79, 10 years later, and is interesting, although inferior. And then the last word I'll give to Ian MacDonald, who says, it's a little bit too faux naif, which is a French phrase meaning artificially simple, to appeal to those without the requisite sweet tooth. He really is a sourpuss, isn't he? He was a sourpuss, Ian MacDonald. A bit joyless. I can't understand why he's being less than generous on a track like Here Comes the Sun. So what if it is simple? So, Yesterday has a fairly simple melody. Some of the greatest things in music are simple, and lyrically as well. You don't need to be sophisticated to be great. So that was Long, 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 and Here Comes the Sun. Thank you for watching. See you next time.